Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Erasing the Stigma. Today, I am very excited to be here with Dr. Nicole Landi. She is a professor at the University of Connecticut, and she's also affiliated with Haskins Laboratories. So, would you be able to give listeners a snapshot of who you are and the work that you do?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Julia. I am a developmental cognitive neuroscientist, and in my lab, we study the neurobiological basis of reading. And we spend a lot of time looking at how um, how the brains of children who learn differently, primarily children with language-based learning difficulties, how they look different. We are interested in also how all brains respond to evidence-based instruction and how that might be different in children with language-based learning disabilities, with the idea that we can identify sort of malleable factors for those kids to help get them ultimately to get them instruction that will work for them.
That is extremely interesting. I like how you were talking about that you guys are actually able to see how the brains of kids with language-based learning differences look different. Because I feel like a lot of people don't realize when talking about language-based learning differences, like dyslexia, that there is that neurological aspect of it, that the brain actually looks different and processes
Mhm.
information differently. So, you were a co-author on a paper that I read, which I thought was extremely interesting. So I was wondering if you could provide a brief synopsis of this paper called The Impact of Computer-Assisted Technology on Literacy Acquisition During COVID-19 Related School Closures.
Sure. So this is a paper. So I am, to be clear, I'm not the first author, nor am I the senior author. I'm one of a number of authors. The senior author is my colleague, Fumiko Heft, also at the University of Connecticut. And this paper looks at the impact of a particular ed tech. So it's a game, really. So it's a literacy game for young children, and it looks at the impact of this on children over the period immediately following the COVID-19 lockdowns. And so basically, what we were doing is trying to see if we gave kids, whoever was willing to sign up, this game, and they played this game over a period of time, would this help ameliorate the COVID-19, the predicted COVID-19 slide? And the COVID-19 slide was supposed to be a loss, right? So kids would not gain the expected reading skills for that period of time. So the idea was, well, if we give kids this online game that they can play, it teaches letter sound associations, it helps them with phonological awareness, so understanding that words are composed of individual sounds and that those sounds can be manipulated. If we give them a game like this, will that help keep their gains in the expected range or even greater than expected versus having that expected slide?
Mhm.
Okay. And so what we saw is that indeed, kids who got this game, right, who played this game had expected reading gains, right? So you can take past historical data to look at what kinds of gains would be expected for children over that period of time and see if they are the same for those kids playing this game. And they were. The tricky part, of course, is that we don't have a control group, right, in this study. It's just the kids playing the game. And so all you're comparing against is expected gains for kids at that age on this particular literacy assessment, right? So you see that they don't slide, right? And the other thing that we looked at, because there's a lot of variability in the degree to which kids uh, in their change from pre to post test, right? So basically they get their literacy skills measured before they play the game and then after they play the game. And there are a lot of differences in that change score. So we wanted to look at individual factors that would sort of predict whether or not you gained more or less in your reading skill over that period of time. Right. And so the kinds of things that predicted it were, so older kids, for example, who had more letter, word, and sound knowledge, those kids gained more over that period than did younger kids or kids who had lower initial like word, letter, and sound knowledge to begin with. So those are the main findings of the paper.
That is extremely interesting. And so, like you were saying, kids who did not come in with the basis of a strong, like reading foundation, would you say that Graph-Learn, which is the educational technology that you're referring to, would you then say that it would be beneficial to someone with dyslexia prior or another language-based learning disability if they're using this after the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic? Would this have the same effects as compared to someone who did not have a language-based learning disability?
Mhm. Yeah, so that's a great question, and the answer is complicated. So the kids in this study had a range of reading abilities or performance, I should say, at the start of the study. So it was not targeting kids who had language-based learning difficulties, right? So many of these kids were typically developing, early readers. Um, One thing to think about with this is we can say from this study that for that group of individuals, right, that we didn't see who that were playing the game, we didn't see the expected slide. What we can't really say is this program beneficial beyond that, right? We haven't looked at kids with language-based learning disabilities in that particular project. We are currently in another project doing a large randomized control trial of this game with kids with language-based learning disabilities. And when that grant is done, I will be able to tell you. But right now, I can't say more about that. A number of studies have looked at this game, at kids playing Graph-Learn, and some studies do see a benefit for kids of various reading skills. Other studies have not found that same benefit. There was a recent, so I think 2019 meta-analysis of this game, and what they found is that kids, reading ability aside, made gains if there was some kind of involvement of parents or teachers playing the game, but not so if that wasn't true. So that's one of the things we're directly examining in the grant I just mentioned, where we're giving Graph-Learn to kids in the RCT, where we're looking at the effectiveness of Graph-Learn with respect to a control intervention. So we'll be able to specifically look at this sort of parent involvement piece to follow up on that meta-analysis.
Okay, so I am going to be eagerly waiting the results of your analysis to see if it is beneficial specifically for kids with language-based learning differences. So, like you're talking about before, though, there is, or there has been shown to be an increased impact of Graph-Learn when there is parent or teacher interaction or support. So, can you give an example of what this support or interaction looks like?
Mhm. That is another great question. So that was not quantified in the meta-analysis where this was found, right? So it was really just the case that they coded it such that if it was done like in the classroom where teachers were supervising, right, there was teacher involvement, for example, right? In our study, what we are actually doing is, because it's in the home, and there have been fewer studies of Graph-Learn use in the home relative to studies that have used it in classrooms or linked with classrooms. In the home, we actually have an app. And on this app, it asks parents every day and every week exactly how they engaged with their children, for how much and what type of interaction they had while their child was playing the game, so that we can specifically look at this, because we don't know, right? From that meta-analysis, it's the case that it was really more like supervision, right? So if a parent, or really most of them were in the classrooms that they're talking about in terms of this effect, if there was someone overseeing the kids going through and playing this game, then there was a larger effect. But it didn't look specifically at what kind of interactions they had, or how they reinforced what the child was learning, or anything like that.
Okay, that makes sense. And so, I mean, one thing that I would assume, and definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but
Mhm.
if you the kids that you studied were, if I'm right, kindergarteners to second graders, so they're
Mhm.
definitely younger. And if there is parent or teacher supervision, that is for sure beneficial to make sure that the kids are actually playing the game and going
Correct.
through it. Did you guys find that there were a there was a more beneficial effect of Graph-Learn if the child was playing it for a longer duration or for more days compared to kids who did not play Graph-Learn for a greater duration of time?
Yeah, I think the effect in the paper you're talking about is actually that more units completed for the duration given was associated with a larger gain, right? So in the game, you kind of have some autonomy, right? You can go through, and kids are asked to play a certain amount and for a certain duration, but we can't make them, right? And so the kids who completed more units per the intervention duration, those kids did make larger gains, right? They went farther in the program and they were doing, more of it in that period of time. So yes, that does have an impact. So making sure that the kids are actually playing it versus doing something else, not completing those modules, that does seem to, not surprisingly, have an effect.
Yes, yes, and that's definitely important for parents if they are dealing with younger kids to make sure that the kids are
Exactly.
because they might not have that self-motivation that older kids have. So,
Right, right.
as mentioned in your paper, one of the risk factors for poor reading ability was living in poverty and growing up in poverty. So, do you have any suggestions as to manageable measures that parents can take if they're living in a low income household to reduce a child's risk for developing a poor reading ability?
Yeah, so that's a super important question and a super important area of study. So individuals who are growing up in poverty face a number of potential challenges that put them at potential risk for reading difficulties, right? They may have less access to education. They may have less exposure to knowledge about early reading and what is important for that. They may have less resources to allocate and spend on the children in this important age range, and they may have less time, right? If they're working more, if they're working multiple jobs, for example, to spend on this. The kind of advice, to be clear, I don't work on this, but the kind of advice you would give is the same advice you would give to any parent, right? So we know that certain things are really important for early literacy. Kids need to be exposed to letters. They need to have their parents or teacher, or whoever it is in their environment, talk with them about books, right? So have some engagement with books. Shared reading is something that's really important early on. Parents can point out letters, name them, talk about the sounds that letters make. They can go through decoding strategies. There are a lot of online games like Graph-A-Learn. It's not the only one like that. It's sort of unique in a number of ways, but there are other things for young children to draw attention to these sort of important early literacy factors, right? And so parents can engage actively with their children with books and talk to them about letters, letter sounds, and sounding out words. So parents can certainly do that at home. We know that just the number of books in the home is predictive of later gains for kids. So just exposing young children to literacy and pre-literacy activities is really important.
Yes, and that's something that I found was really cool about Graph-A-Learn because it did expose kids to what you were talking about. And it's fun because it's a game, so kids can be
Really
motivated to
cute.
do it themselves for sure. But I also think that is very important for all parents, despite their situation, to understand that exposing kids to letters and words and books. But the cool thing about that is that's something you can do all the time because there's letters all around you.
Yeah.
So you don't have to, if you don't have the time, sit for long periods of time and read book after book. It can still be beneficial to kids if you're just pointing out letters or words in the scenery around you. So I think that is extremely important advice. So the last question that I will ask you today is, what is one thing that listeners can do to erase the stigma behind language-based learning differences?
Yeah, that's another great question. And it's something I think about a lot. I don't know that there's a definitive answer to this. I think it's important that we all realize that people, right, there are many, many individual differences among us. And those differences make us special and unique. There is no one who does not face some challenges, right? Even if they have many strengths, right? We all have sort of different profiles of strengths and weaknesses that we have to learn to work with, right? To foster our strengths and acknowledge, handle, manage our limitations, right? That's part of life. And so I think, working with children, pointing out that this is just one thing that they have struggles with. They have many other strengths in other areas, and to make sure to foster those strengths in other areas. And then to, just be honest and sincere in our help with them, right? We understand that this is a challenge for you. We're working with you to help you gain these skills. It is one important skill in life, but there are so many other important things, right? It is by no means the only thing, right? And so it's important for folks to be able to read, right? You've got to read your prescription bottle, you've got to get news this way, right? But it's not the only thing, right? And so I think thinking about people holistically and not labeling them for a difficulty that they have is really important, but also kind of teaching and helping kids understand that this is, if they have a language-based learning difference, this is part of who they are, and they might learn differently, but there are things to help them gain the confidence here that they need.
And I think that is so important what you said, because I feel like oftentimes we forget that everyone has struggles, and some people's struggles might definitely be more apparent than other people's, but everyone is dealing with something, and that is just such an important thing to remember. And what I think is just so cool about people in general is that we are complementary to each other. So my strength might be your
Yeah,
weakness might be my strength, and there's no one in the world who is amazing at everything. So someone with a language-based learning difference, they might have extreme creative talents and they might struggle with reading or writing. But then the next person might be amazing at reading and writing, but not have those creative talents. And those people
exactly.
can work together to make the world a better place. So I just think for all listeners, that is something that you should always remember, that everyone is struggling with something and you are not alone. You're never alone. So I really appreciate you coming to speak with me and providing me and my listeners so much information. And I will be eagerly awaiting your study on whether or not Grapple Learn is beneficial for specifically people with language-based learning differences. And I just really appreciate speaking with you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.
Bye.